Welcome everyone to my first YouTube video for the Open Source Community workgroup. I'm going to try to start by tackling a problem in Hades, which is some of the R packages that we have in Odyssey. And I'm just going to kind of record my thought process and what I do, and we'll see how far we get. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is the Hades webpage, odyssey.github.io/Hades, and we can find all of the R packages here. The one that I'm going to be working on is called DatabaseConnector, and it is used to connect to databases. So it kind of acts as like the driver, database driver functionality. I'm going to go to the GitHub page and search for DatabaseConnector. Okay, then we'll go to Issues and Integrate with dplyr package. This is an issue that's been around for a while, and I think it's one that Martijn is willing to help me with and work on. So I'm going to try to jump on it. Yeah, basically, it's to get dplyr working using the database connector, the database connector connection. So my first kind of step is to just try to get this to work and see where we hit a roadblock. Now, the first thing you want to do when you start working on an Odyssey package is fork it. So you go to the GitHub repo and click the fork button. And I have already forked it here. So I've got DatabaseConnector. And then I want to fetch and merge upstream. So this makes sure that my repository here is in sync with the Odyssey repository, which is called the upstream. The next thing we want to do is copy this this URL here, and we will go to new project, and we'll say version control git, put in the repository URL, and we'll put it in our projects folder and say create project. So this is just cloning the repository. Okay, one thing that I need to do is just change this from HTTP to SSH because I can't push with HTTPS. So to do that, you just do git remote origin set URL git at github.com, then colon ablock3 /database connector. Git remote set URL origin. Okay, that's done. We can also say git remote add upstream if we want to add the Odyssey repository as the upstream. That's good to do. And for this, we will use HTTP. And then we can do something like git, well, let's first check git status, see what branch we're on. Okay, we're on the master branch. We're going to move to the develop branch. So git checkout develop. And we will say git pull upstream develop. Okay, so we're on the develop branch. We're in sync with the Odyssey develop branch. And then I'm going to build and install this package with the shortcut Command Shift B or Control Shift B, I think. So that builds the package and installs it. Now, let's start a new R script where we can do some work. And let's just try to use dplyr. So we will create a database connection. We'll say library database connector. And library dplyr. And I've got this snippet. I can just type dbc, hit enter, and I get my connection details for my local Postgres server. So I have a Postgres database with a synthetic CDM in it. The database is called COVID, and the server is localhost. So if I run these, I get cdm.5person. I'm just taking the first 8 rows, and I'm making sure that I have database access there. Now, one thing you can do with dplyr is create these table reference objects. So to do that, use a TBL, pass in the connection, and then the name of the table. If the table is in a schema, then you have to use this dbplyr function called inSchema, put the schema name, and then the table name. It seems like a lot, but it actually down the line is quite nice to use for querying the database. Okay, and so we're trying to use dplyr with a database connector connection, and we get this error, syntax error near CDM5. Okay, so what's going on in this with this error? We have a syntax error, and it's being called from low-level query SQL.default, which is this is a function in the database connector package that sends a query to the database. And so let's look in that function. So I kind of want to know what this query is, so I'm going to put a message here. We'll say paste query, and this is just going to print it out for me. I will disconnect from the database and build and restart R. So now I have that extra bit of code in there. And so this now prints out as a message the whole select statement here. So it's trying to select, make a selection from the database. There's something maybe just wrong with the SQL code that dplyr is trying to run. Connection has been closed. Okay, we'll go up here, try it again. Here's the SQL code. All right, so we get the exact same error. And I did some Googling, and it seems like maybe we just have to use a different quote around the identifiers. So let's just try switching the quotes and see. if that does anything. This is a problem that I've run into with Database Connector a lot. If you have some error in a SQL query, it's kind of not, the query isn't rolled back, and every subsequent transaction will be aborted. But the way to fix that is to say db execute on the connection the rollback statement, and that gives you a 0, and now it should work. So I'm not sure if there's a way, maybe at some point, to make this automatic so you don't have to manually roll back if there's an error, but that's how you fix that. So we switched the quotes, and now the query works. So the issue might be with the quote. So how do we change this quote here? So this function will quote SQL. DB quote identifier. Okay, so we have the connection, and we can just type something, and it will quote it for us. And we can see that with this connection, it is using a single quote. So how do we fix this? Well, one thing I like to do often is just type a browser call at the beginning of the function that I want to kind of jump into. We'll close the connection. Yep, rebuild the package, and try this again. Call db quote identifier now, and now we are suspended on the debugger inside this function. So we can run the code in this function inside the environment that it's currently executing in. So this first thing says if length of x is 0, then we just use the empty character. But the length of x isn't 0, so we can just print out what x is. That's blah. So x is not NA, so that will not get executed. I'm not actually sure what nzchar is, but this returns true. So we're going to do this substitution thing where if we find, so there's a slot in the connection called, there's a slot in the connection called identifier quote, and this returns the character that's used to quote identifiers with this connection. And this connection is a database connector connection. So what this statement does here is if there's a quote in the thing you want to quote, then it's going to replace that with 2 quotes, which doesn't make a difference for this example because blah does not have any quotes in it. But then this next statement, it is where we put the quote and then the string and then the quote on either side of it. So the key idea here then is like how did this identifier quote get set? So one thing I can do is if I highlight identifier quote, hit Control Shift F or Command Shift F, and we can find in files. This looks across the whole package to see where this shows up. And so we can start looking here. Okay, so connect using JDBC driver. So this is kind of like a back-end connection function. It's going to actually make the connection, and it has this argument called identifier quote, and by default it's the single quote mark. In addition, we also have the string quote, which I think is similarly used to quote SQL. So the idea then that we want to do to fix this is to change this argument for the Postgres database. So we can see this connect. The connect function is pretty big. This is the connect function, and this is how the function we call to actually make the connection to the database. And there's a whole bunch of branching logic here based on the type of database it is. So here's SQL Server, Parallel Data Warehouse, Oracle, Postgres. Okay, this is where we want to make a change, and when we connect using JDBC driver, identifier quote, we're going to use a double quote instead of a single quote, and string quote will do the same thing. Okay, that's the only change we're going to make, just passing in those two arguments. And we will take out this browser statement and then rebuild the package. And let's just try running our example again. So we're still printing out the query message, but we did not get an error. So we'll just check to see. So if we print out the person, that should show the first few rows, which it does. And we'll try using some dplyr. And that works. Let's try a join. So we'll create a reference to the concept table. And you can see again it's printing out that SQL code. And we'll say person inner join concept by gender concept ID equals concept ID. And we'll say count. So you can create a new variable inside the count called gender, which is going to be equal to concept name, and it's going to group by this variable and count rows grouped by the variable if it works, and it did work. And if we want to see the SQL that this is generating, we can just print that out. So I think at least at first glance, that fixed some of the problems. I think there may be more issues kind of lurking, but we'll go with this for now. So what I'm going to do then is maybe I should add a test. Okay, so I'm going to write, I wrote a little test here that dplyr works. Well, all right, so this test passes, which is good. And this just shows that what we did works and should continue to work. And we'll say disconnect. Next thing we need to do is commit the changes and then push to the remote, which would be GitHub. So let's look at Git here. And if we go to diff, these are the changes I want to commit. I don't want to commit this. Oh, here, new file, yes. Okay, so I'll check that and that. And we'll say change db quote identifier to double quote for Postgres. Commit. And I could push there using that button, but I kind of like to know which remote I'm pushing to, just because in some cases I have access to an OHDSI repo and I don't want to push directly to I want to be careful if I push to the OHDSI repository. So git status git push origin develop. So origin is my fork, and I'm pushing to the develop branch. All right, the changes have been pushed. So let's look here. Okay, so then it says develop had a push less than a minute ago, compare and pull request. This is some really nice guidance on creating a pull request. It says always file an issue, and we already have an issue in this case, but this is a good thing to do, is to file an issue to make sure the maintainer is happy with your proposal. Sometimes a pull request is a good way to explain your proposal, because you can have some working code, maybe just minimally, but it shows explicitly what changes you would like to make. So sometimes you could just create a pull request and create an issue at the same time, or create an issue and with a small test or some working code. This says make sure you pass R check without errors or warnings before submitting. Target the develop branch. Add a unit test, which we did. Don't try to improve parts of the code that are not related to your issue. All very good advice. So I'm going to target the develop branch, merge from my develop to OHDSI develop, and I kind of like to create the draft pull request because it signals that there's probably more to the story, I kind of just want something for him to be able to look at, and this creates a nice way for him to look at these two files and very easily see the changes that were made. That's kind of why I like to use the pull request as a way to show what the change is. And then GitHub checks are going to run, which is kind of nice. These are kind of nuanced, and I think we should do a whole video on how these work, especially when they are running tests against remote databases. But that is basically it for this video. That was my first video trying to kind of show how I tried to solve a problem. I don't think it's completely solved at all, but I just think, but that's maybe one small issue that maybe got solved. Um, and I hope you like it, and I'd love to hear comments or suggestions on anything. And if you are working on a project, um, I think also consider making a video and just screen recording yourself working on it, and share with the open source community group, and we can all kind of learn from each other and our workflows and how we're doing things. So with that, have a great day.